Thank you for that great welcome. You all know the... Oh, I should start at the beginning. It's great to be back with you all. It's so wonderful to be back at the hotel after a few years away. And I also like to welcome all of you joining us online, wherever you are, all around the world. It's a convocation. It's so wonderful. Well, you all know the subject for tonight, but don't tell me, okay? Because it's coming to me. It's right there. Yes, it's intuition. Yeah? Pretty good, huh? And it says it here in the notes. Are you impressed? Please don't say yes. Intuition. It's a really important subject. But what is it exactly? Our guru said that intuition is soul guidance that appears naturally in those moments when the mind is calm. And he said, the goal of yoga science is to calm the mind, that without distortion it may hear the infallible counsel of the inner voice. It appears naturally. You know, I think there's an idea out there that we have to be pretty far along with meditation to have intuition, right? And there's no doubt that progress in meditation makes intuition much easier. But we don't have to wait years before we can begin to call upon intuition. I remember back when I was thinking of becoming a monk. From the time the thought first entered my head to the moment I knew it was what I should do with my life, 3 years passed. 3 years of introspection, prayer, and meditation on this very question. But did it need to take 3 years? I had gotten to the point of deciding it was indeed what I wanted to do with my life, but I still didn't know, and I wanted to know. And this wasn't just because word had got out at the local SRF center that I was thinking of becoming a monk, and there was a little skepticism. In one devotee's mind at least. And I know this because one day we were on the way to a retreat, and I was sitting in the back of the car. There were a couple of devotees in the front. And at that time, I was not the only member of the center that was thinking of becoming a monastic. And the two devotees in the front of the car, they started talking to each other about whether they thought such and such would make a good monk, or such and such would make a good nun. And then the driver said, but Cormac, I mean, that's me. He said, but Cormac, I don't. And then he stopped. He suddenly realized I was sitting in the back of the car. You know, another devotee approached me at this time and said, so, you're thinking of jumping into the abyss? I mean, seriously, the abyss? I mean, the things people think of and the ways people think, you know. My sister once said to me, you know, being a monk, is it very difficult to always have to wear the same color? I mean, if you gave me 1,000,000 years to write down all the things that are difficult about being a monastic, I don't think I would have come up with that. So you know, this skepticism and concern for the path that I might take, it didn't bother me. I simply wanted to know for my own sake whether I was making the right choice. So one day I was talking to one of our monks in our Hidden Valley ashram about my dilemma. I had moved to California by this point, you know, intuitive answer or no. And he said, well, you won't know until you come. You seem sincere, so just come. And if it doesn't work out, you just leave. As soon as he said that, I knew I would come and that I would stay. And that was what I had been waiting for. It was certain, absolute knowledge. It was intuition. You might be thinking, well, but it took you 3 years to get to that point. But when I thought afterwards about why the intuition had appeared at that point, I realized that for those 3 years, I had subconsciously been afraid of making the wrong decision. And when that fear was taken away, it was revealed and taken away at the same time. Then the mind became sufficiently calm for intuition to manifest. Again, in the Master's words, intuition is soul guidance appearing naturally during those instants when the mind is calm. So whatever is going on in your life right now, know that the knowledge of what to do is right within you, even now. You know, I find this thought to be very comforting. Even when I don't yet have an answer to the issue at hand, it's in there. It's in there. So don't think that intuition is only for the advanced. It is not. It is for all of us. Because intuition is more than just a tool for making right decisions in life. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita tells us right at the beginning that intuition is the spiritual power that coordinates all our other spiritual powers and leads us to spiritual victory. In the 3rd verse of chapter 1, Duryodhana, king of the material forces, tells Drona, his teacher, who represents habit, "O teacher, behold this great army of the sons of Pandu," you know, that's Arjuna and his brothers, "arranged in battle order by thy talented disciple, Drishtadyumna." This character, Drishtadyumna, represents intuition, and he is the general that we need to coordinate all our spiritual qualities and efforts. Now, the case can, of course, be made that Arjuna, representing self-control, is the most important spiritual quality. You know, after all, Master dedicates his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita to the Arjuna devotee within every seeker. Within every one of you is that Arjuna devotee. But Arjuna and Drishtadyumna together, self-control and intuition, are an unbeatable combination. Do you know the other Gita character that represents intuition? Krishna. Krishna himself. In his commentary on verses 20 to 23 of chapter 1, Guruji writes that in this battle between the good Pandus and the wicked Kurus, Krishna became the charioteer of the noble Pandu brother Arjuna. And Master said that the interpretation of this allegory is that when our fiery self-control, Arjuna, is ready to battle all the forces of the senses, then Spirit, Krishna, becomes the devotee's charioteer or guiding power. Master says, Spirit expresses itself through the instrumentality of the intuition of the soul, Spirit's individualized reflection in man. Krishna and Arjuna together, intuition and self-control, the central relationship of the Gita, and you could say of the path and of life itself. So how can we develop our intuition? Is it just a product of meditation? No. Although meditation is certainly the most important way to develop intuition, but there's a lot more that we can be doing to nurture its growth. And Master has a supplement lesson, lesson 75. It's called How to Develop Intuition Consciously. And in this lesson, he describes everything that we can do to develop our intuition. And he gives a technique that helps us draw on the combined forces of the spiritual eye, right between the eyes, and the heart center that will help develop our intuition. I'll give the technique here quickly so we can get it into our minds. And then at the end of the class, we'll come back to it and spend some time practicing it together. And Master says that we should first practice this technique for several months if we're seeking any kind of success or answer to an issue we're dealing with, no matter what it is. And it's very simple, just 4 points. First one is to learn to reason clearly and calmly feel all the time. You know, and this goes back to the story I just gave you about when the fear was taken away, the mind became calm. That intuition was there, again, naturally, as Master says. So that's the first point. Do what we can to reason clearly and calmly feel all the time. And then he says, practice one of the meditation techniques until we have attained a certain calmness, until we have a sense of calmness that fills the inner recesses of the body, he says, until a divine happiness fills the inner recesses of the soul, and the breath becomes calm and quiet. Now, not everybody here will have the lessons or these techniques, so when we practice at the end, instead we're going to take an affirmation, and we're going to use an affirmation to get to that same point of stillness, as much as we can within the time that we have. And then the third point is to concentrate simultaneously at the point between the eyebrows, the Christ consciousness center, and the heart. Okay, simultaneously concentrate at both points. And only then do we ask God to direct our intuition. The Master says we can pray, what am I going to do about this situation? Lord, make me intuition guided in everything. So that's the technique. But why do we concentrate on the heart center and the spiritual eye simultaneously? Well, there's a number of reasons. I've already given Master's brief definition of intuition as soul guidance, but now let's go deeper. This is really fascinating. And again, this is from lesson 75. The medulla at the back of at the top of the spinal cord, at the base of the brain, is the center of intuition within us. And from that medulla, Master says that 3 rays of astral light, immanent in which are 3 feelers of consciousness, he calls them, reason, will, and feeling, they shoot forward into the brain, and one whirls around the brain in a circular motion, and that's called reason or wisdom. Another ray coming from the medulla shoots towards the eyebrows and is called will. This is the center of will. And then one shoots from the medulla into the heart and permeates the heart, and that is called feeling. And Master says that in the ultimate state of consciousness or samadhi, reason and feeling become one consciousness of God, and that's pure intuition. And in God, there is no difference between heart, feeling, and head, reason. God wills through both. But before we talk about how to develop our intuition in more depth, I'd like to discuss 3 preliminary, but I think very common obstacles. The first one is that we forget to ask for intuitive guidance. The second one is that we're afraid to ask for intuitive guidance. And the third one, Brother Satyananda kind of talked about this on Monday night, even after our intuition has told us what to do, we can forget what it has told us. And the insidious thing about these obstacles is that we're often not aware of them. They come from the ego, and the ego doesn't like its tricks to be known, but we're going to talk about them. Okay, so obstacle number 1, we forget to ask for guidance. And I think this is quite common, especially among competent people, right? Competent people are not used to asking for help and guidance, because, just in their daily life, because they often don't need to. And that's great. But such devotees might have to make a special effort to remember to ask God and Master for help in their sadhana. We have the techniques, but it's more than just practice of the techniques. Devotion has to be there as well. And Guruji wrote in Scientific Healing Affirmations, a balance should be struck between the medieval idea of wholly depending on God and the modern way of soul reliance on the ego. And I think this is a fine art. The tendency can be to favor one approach or the other, but the fulcrum between these 2 approaches is where the magic happens, I think, and all things become possible. When I think of Paramahansa Yogananda and how he lived his life, he represents to me that perfect balance of our own God-given potential and surrender to God's will. Isn't it so? So obstacle number 2, and we're going to come back to this idea when we practice the affirmation at the end. Obstacle number 2, we're afraid to listen. Master said once that when students asked him why St. Lin was able to make such progress, Roger C. Janakananda, he replied, Roger C. knows how to listen. But what does it mean to know how to listen? Why is it so hard? I think a big part of it is that we're afraid, consciously or unconsciously, of the answer that might come if and when we ask for guidance. It can be difficult to give up our own feelings and beliefs about the way things need to be, right? Or is that just me? So it takes constant introspection to make sure that we're being open to whatever truth might be. Brother Satyananda emphasized on Monday night that the best results from introspection come from intuitive insight. But the kind of introspection I'm talking about right now is just this one point, to ask ourselves whether we're really open to whatever guidance might come. And many devotees have told, there's no need to be afraid, right? Because many devotees have told me, and I've found this myself, that when faced with difficult circumstances, we become completely at peace with whatever we're going through once we've been able to access an intuitive understanding of the situation. The thing we were afraid of is no longer frightening once we know that it's coming from God, and it's coming for our own highest good. So let's not be afraid. Obstacle number 3, we can forget intuitive guidance even after we've received it. I've had first-hand experience of this obstacle, as I have had of the other 2 as well. So remember I told you that it was 3 years between the time I had the first thought of becoming a monk and knowing that, yes, that was what I was meant to do with this life. Actually, I knew from the very first thought I had of becoming a monk that it was meant to be, and I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it. I was living in Korea at the time. I had applied for Kriya, living in Korea, applied for Kriya, and I was eagerly awaiting for the lessons to arrive. One day, as I was coming home from the office, there was the envelope with the Mother Center address on the top left-hand corner, and I knew immediately what it was, so I opened the door and picked up the envelope, and I tore it open. I didn't even go to the table and sit down. I tore it open. I wanted to get those Kriya lessons. And a little leaflet dropped to the floor. And I thought, oh, what is that? I knew it wasn't one of the lessons. So I bent down, picked it up. And it had a title, A Life of Devotion. So I thought, what's that about? So I opened it and I started reading. This is what it says. Down through the ages, in the great religious traditions of both East and West, there have been those who have chosen to renounce worldly aspirations and pursuits. I don't know when the alarm bell started to ring, but anyway, worldly aspirations and pursuits in order to dedicate themselves single-heartedly to the love and service of God. Whether in solitary hermitages or monastic communities, all have shared that common ideal of consecrating their lives in body, mind, heart, and soul to the ultimate quest of the human spirit. And it goes on. The monastic order of self-realization fellowship established by Paramahansa Yogananda offers an opportunity to embrace such a life of spiritual dedication. Do you know how I reacted to this? I got this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, and my mind was shouting, no, no, no. Why did I react this way? Because I knew that that was what I was meant to do with my life, and my ego had other ideas. It immediately took over and shut down that intuition. You know, the battle described in the Bhagavad Gita is very real. So I put that little leaflet aside. I started reading the Kriya lessons, and by the time I had finished them, about an hour later, I had completely forgotten about that little leaflet and my reaction to it. And months later, when the thought came to me again about becoming a monk, and I wondered whether it was something I should do, I had long forgotten that episode. So sometimes our intuition tries to tell us things even when we don't ask. But if it's something we don't want to hear, we find ways to distract ourselves so that we can forget. So Guruji placed the greatest importance on developing intuition. You could say it's really what this path is all about. Sister Ambalika was one of her nuns. She lived to the age of 100. She entered the ashram in 1950, so, you know, just over a year, less than 2 years before Master's Mahasamadhi. And she passed in 1996. And she told us, and this was an article in our magazine some years back, that Master used to often tell the monastics, practice your intuition. Practice it daily and constantly, and I will answer. Now, Sister did this, and it was working. But then there came a time when she wasn't feeling the Guru's guiding presence. And she'd mentally complain about the situation, even to the point of tears. And then one night she heard a voice say very clearly in her head, "Where are you searching for me? I'm right here. Talk to me, prove me. Talk to me, prove me. Talk to me, prove me." So then she said she started asking questions, and not out loud in her mind, but she started getting answers right away. But she wondered whether it was God that was answering her or her guru. She asked Muktimata about it, and Muktimata said, it doesn't matter. You know, it's one and the same ultimately. But that wasn't satisfying to Sister Ambalika. She wanted to know. So then she prayed, "Tell me that you know I'm talking to you. Please tell me." She said she went on with that prayer for some time, for some months. And then one day, and then this was just before Master went out to the desert for the last time. The nuns gathered so that they could say goodbye to him. And a sister turned the corner of the building, Mother Center, and came into Master's presence. She saw Master looking at her. And the Guru said, "Oh, there you are. You've been asking me questions." And Sister broke into tears again to know that Master had always been with her, had always been with her. I remember one time before I came into the ashram, I was working as an engineer at the time. There was a particular problem that I wasn't able to solve. I was trying to work out the forces on a structure, and I just couldn't get them to balance. I knew they had to balance, you know, that's just the way buildings work. If they don't balance, you know, it's going to start walking down the street, and we know that doesn't happen, but I couldn't get the forces to balance. So the thought came to me, why don't I just meditate, then ask Master about it and see what happens? And, you know, I didn't know what Master knew about engineering, but he's an avatar, so there's that. You know, and as much as anything, I was curious, to see whether I would get an answer. And within a minute or so, the answer came to me. And I still remember that moment so vividly, even though I remember virtually nothing else about the project. And I've talked to many devotees that tell me they do the same thing. You know, just on Sunday, right here at the open house, a devotee told me, I have a range of patents. I think he said he was an aeronautics engineer, and he said, every one of those patents, the idea came to me after I had sat down and practiced Kriya Yoga and asked for an intuitive guidance about how to solve a problem, every one of them. Sri Dayamata has a wonderful little book called Intuition, Soul Guidance for Life's Decisions. And in it, Ma gives many practices that help us to develop our intuition. Far too many to cover here. But I want to mention two of them that are of particular importance. And the first is to train our mind to draw on the power in the spiritual eye. See, Mo writes that for most people, the consciousness is on the outer surface of the body. It's in the lower chakras. And that's why we're in a state of restlessness and worldly consciousness. But, Ma said, that in the ashram, we're taught to keep our minds always at the Christ center. Always, she said. And it's one of the first things that Paramahansa Yogananda taught her when she came to him. He told her, let the mind always rest here at this center, the point between the eyebrows. Because the more the attention is focused there, the more power we draw from the higher centers of spiritual perception in the spine, from the heart center and above. And that's the fourth center. So we draw power from the three centers below the spiritual eye. And if you're thinking right now, I should try that, or I should take up that practice again, your first question is likely to be, how do we do that? How do we learn to keep the attention at the Christ center during all the activity of the day? And Ma said, only one way, through practice. She said, every now and then, throughout the day, it's possible to stop for just a moment, whatever we're doing, anywhere, and just let the mind rest at that point. And she said that truthfully, it becomes automatic after a while. She said, we will find this if we cultivate that habit. It's just a habit. And as time goes on, we'll find that more and more our mind rests at that point, no matter what we're doing. Our consciousness has become spiritualized. Our guru gives another technique in lesson 75 about receiving inner guidance. It's similar. And he said that whenever we feel the need for guidance, concentrate at the spiritual eye and deeply pray for attunement with truth. And he gave us the following short prayer. O spiritual eye, show me the solution to all my problems. Remain always open before me, that I avoid the pitfalls in the path of life and keep to the highway that leads to thy palace of peace. Now, the second practice that Ma gives in her book is to learn to be aware of the intuitive guidance coming from the heart. So the first practice was to be aware of the intuition coming from the spiritual eye. Second one, to become aware of intuition coming from the heart. Remember, Guruji said that those three rays, they're all aspects of intuition. They're all aspects of intuition coming from the medulla, the seat of intuition. And Ma said that in this case, if we have a problem, don't try to analyze it, but just remain watching the heart. And then as we go about our duties, when the thought of the problem arises, just put your mind at the heart center. I mean, these techniques are so simple, right? But they're so powerful. Ma said, concentrate there and try to be aware of the feelings that are flowing from that center. Then we remain calm. And Master said that if we can do that, suddenly a great feeling comes upon us, and our intuition will point us to the right step that we should do at that time. We might meet people in our everyday life that can help us. Or through their contact and counsel, we'll find the right way. Ma said that through our persistent prayers for guidance and our calm receptivity, an inner sense will prompt us as to the best way to proceed. When that happens, go forward with full faith, but all the while remain flexible, We can talk to Master, talk to God and say, this seems to be the right way to go, but if at any time, Lord, you show me that I have made the wrong choice, I can step back. I can accept correction. Now, sometimes we're feeling very anxious about something, and we might think, I want to practice intuition, but I'm so, my heart is pounding about some problem I'm very anxious, even fearful, how could intuition possibly work for me in the state I'm in right now? Master gives another technique that helps us in this case. This is from his talk in Man's Eternal Quest, Eliminating the Static of Fear from the Mind Radio. And he says that whenever we feel afraid, we take our right hand and put it on the skin next to the heart and rub from left to right and say, Father, I am free. Father, I am free. Tune out this fear from my from my heart radio. The Master said that just as we can tune out static on an ordinary radio, I don't know if anybody has them anymore, but you know, if you remember them, if you're of a certain vintage, and you know, we can tune out that static. The same thing works when we're feeling. You know, we can really feel that heart going at times, can't we? And this technique is really powerful to help that heart calm down. And then we can practice the other techniques for intuition. Master said, concentrate on the thought that you want to tune out fear from your heart, and then it will go, and the joy of God will be perceived. You know, this is one reason that in the Bhagavad Gita, fearlessness is listed first in the list of 26 qualities of the divinely inclined person. Fearlessness helps us achieve the calmness that we need to access the precious intuitive guidance that can give us certainty in this very uncertain world. So I'd like to give 2 tips for developing a daily routine for the twin practices of keeping the mind at the spiritual eye and or the heart center. And the first is when the question comes up, you know, but I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything. How can I, you know, where do I put my attention? I don't feel anything. Well, you know, that's not exactly true. At the very least, we can feel the physical sensations coming from those 2 regions, right? Just the, you know, if you're wearing, you know, you can feel the skin or whatever. Or maybe interoception, you can feel the heart, some people. These feelings in themselves, you think, well, they're mundane. Those are, you know, no intuition is going to come from them until we remember Master's quote from Lesson 61, which is, as you look upon creation, which appears so solid and real, you all know this quote, I think, remember always to think of it as the thought of God, frozen into physical forms. You can condition your mind to this realization in little ways each day. Whenever you see a beautiful sunset, think to yourself, it is God's painting on the sky. As you look into the face of each person you meet, think within, it is God who has become that form. And Master said, we can apply that trend of thought to all our experiences. For example, the blood in my body is God, the reason in my mind is God, the love in my heart is God. Everything that exists is God, including whatever we can feel, as mundane as it might be, at the heart center and between the eyes, at the spiritual eye. It doesn't matter. We just remind ourselves, that's God too. Everything is God, including those feelings. The second tip is to keep it, that helps us to make the practice inspiring in its early stages. You know, if we're not feeling anything, so to speak, you know, in quotes. This makes it inspiring. And that technique alone is something that we can bring into every other experience in our life. So just because we're not feeling intuitive doesn't mean we're not getting great results from that simple practice. This is inspiring and helps us to keep going until we are able to access those intuitive feelings. And the second tip is to keep a daily record of your practice. It could be a journal, it could be an index card with a date and a tick mark for each time you've practiced. It could be you make a note in an app on your phone, whatever works for you and keeps you motivated as you build up your intuitional routine. So, to recap, we can develop intuition by practicing awareness of the heart center and the spiritual eye. These are the centers of the powers of will and feeling that emanate from the medulla. But these two centers are also connected in another fascinating way. Do you all remember how in the Bhagavad Gita, at the beginning, before the battle starts, Arjuna tells Krishna to drive his chariot out and place it between the two armies because he wanted to see how the battlefield lay? And Master says there's a very deep symbolism behind that. You know, you think, well, that's not a spiritual teaching, that's just, setting the scene. No, it has a deep spiritual meaning. And it's this, that placing the chariot between the two armies is a reference to the spinal centers, but specifically to the lowest one, the coccyx, the fourth one, the heart center or the dorsal center, and the Christ center, the spiritual eye. And Master calls these intuitional caravanserai, intuitional stopping points, vantage points in which the devotee's consciousness becomes ensconced while moving Godward through the centers to the brain. And he said, there's a polarity between these centers that helps the attuned consciousness to be lifted upward. First, there's a magnetism between the negative pole of the coccyx and the positive pole of the heart. And this helps to draw the energy up to the heart center. And then when we go into deeper meditation, the heart center then switches. It switches from a positive pole to a negative pole, and then the Christ center becomes a positive pole, and the current is then drawn up to the spiritual eye from the heart. Now, if that all sounds a bit beyond our current understanding or experience, don't worry, it doesn't matter. All we need to do is keep practicing awareness of the two centers, and the intuitive knowledge of the connection between the two will come in time. Some of you, I know, will get a glimpse of it when we practice the technique from Lesson 75 in a little bit. How can I say this confidently? Well, I gave this talk a few months ago at our Greenfield retreat, and we did this. Devotee came up to me afterwards and said, "This really works. This really works." Now, Sri Dayamata once told one of our monks, Brother Paramahansa, that there are two kinds of intuition: worldly intuition and spiritual intuition. What did Ma mean by worldly intuition? As far as I know, Ma didn't define it, but let's just say it's intuition about the things and people in the world around us that does not come from the soul. That's probably not even possible, but I'm talking about the kind of intuition that some people have, and they're not necessarily, or at least not overtly, spiritual. Many of us know people like this. One of the classic examples is of a firefighter going into a building, and fire raging all around. And he suddenly gets this intuitive feeling, we're in big trouble here. We've got to get out. The floor's going to collapse or something. And he tells all his men, get out immediately. They all did. And then a few seconds later, the floor collapsed. It would have killed them all. And researchers were fascinated by what gave him that knowledge that his crew had to get out right then. And he didn't know. But they kept asking questions, they kept talking about it, and he suddenly realized, oh yeah, my feet were hot. And usually in a fire, the heat goes upwards, and so, usually the feet are not as hot as, everywhere else. And it made him realize that there's got to be a basement. There's got to be a fire in the basement. And it's reaching the floor, it's a wooden floor, and that floor could go at any moment. And that was all subconscious. That chain of reasoning, completely hidden from him. But the knowledge of what to do, that's when it became conscious. Get out. And so this is, I think you could say, worldly intuition. It's not necessarily spiritual. It's based on all the knowledge we've gathered through our experiences in life. Joel Pearson is a neuroscientist at the University of New South Wales in Australia, and he spent 25 years studying this type of intuition. And he summarized everything he learned from those 25 years of study into 5 rules. He wrote a book about it recently called The Intuition Toolkit. And I'm just going to read the rules because after I do that, I'm going to tell you what Master says in Lesson 75 about how we develop intuition. And you can see that, in a way, worldly intuition is the foundation upon which we can build our spiritual intuition. So it's quite fascinating. Rule 1, use our self-awareness to check our emotion before we practice intuition, because any strong emotional feelings overpower our sensitivity to the subtle signals of intuition. Rule number 2, learn a subject before practicing intuition with regard to that subject. Rule number 3, instincts and addictions are not intuition. Instincts and addictions are either hardwired or at the very least hard to get rid of. But intuition is easily adaptable. Powerful, irresistible cravings are an illusion of intuition. Now, those are the first 3 rules. I don't think Master would really agree with the next 2 rules, because now we're getting into the realm of where spiritual intuition can work. But in terms of worldly intuition, it becomes very dangerous. Rule 4, resist the temptation to apply intuition to issues that are inherently probabilistic. What does that mean? You know, scary things like that are easy to imagine and therefore likely to induce fear. You know, exactly what Master talks about. He gives us an example, such as being in a plane crash. Well, I don't know about you, but if I got a strong intuition to not get on a plane, I might very well listen to it. You know, just because it's probabilistic and some planes crash doesn't mean that it's not going to be the one that I'm about to board. Rule number 5, only use intuition in familiar and predictable contexts. Again, the rules make sense from a certain point of view, but there was nothing familiar or predictable about deciding to become a monk or not. That's like something you do once, and that's it. You know, it doesn't happen again, maybe in a future life or something. That's where spiritual intuition comes in. Now let's look at spiritual intuition. And Master, again, he tells us what we need to do to develop intuition in Lesson 75. There's a whole bunch of things, 8 of them actually, including daily introspection. We use intuition in introspection, and we can use introspection to develop intuition. Another one Master gives is depth of thought and continued activity in one direction. What does that mean? It's becoming an expert or a master of a certain field. And when we've become an expert in a certain field, then we gain access to intuitions about that field, like that fireman, because he's been exposed to so many different situations. When something out of the ordinary happens, he can pick up on it. Calmness. Keeping the mind free from all prejudices, moods, and restlessness. Again, this is one of Pearson's rules. You know, check your emotion. Don't let emotion get in the way. And the last one Master gives is meditation, which he says is best of all, and then holding to the calm after effects of meditation. But then he says, we have to be very careful about how we use our intuition while it is still undeveloped, because we can be prone to what he calls convictions born of erroneous judgment. And he says these may arise from, again, there are 8 of them in Lesson 75, including imagination, superstition, habits of thinking and judging in a particular way, deeply held prejudices. I think the world is really working very, very hard these days to make us polarized, to make us adopt a certain opinion, but we have to be careful. We have to resist those tendencies and make sure we're remaining calm so that we can know what's actually happening. So that's a lot, right? If there's one key point, what do you think it would be? One thing necessary to develop intuition. I think it has to be calmness. Calmness gives us the best chance of accessing reason feeling, that's not emotion, feeling, and intuition itself. And again, going back to the first quote I read this evening from Autobiography of a Yogi, intuition is soul guidance, appearing naturally in man during those instants when his mind is calm. And it's through calmness that we avoid convictions born of erroneous judgment, and it's calmness that allows all the other ways of developing intuition to really work. Now, a wonderful thing happens as we begin to practice intuition in our daily lives. As we develop the habit of putting the mind at the heart center and the Christ center, whenever something difficult happens, instead of immediately reacting to the situation, we find that we take a moment and check in with our intuition first. And this brings a wonderful simplicity to life. We still have to deal with specific situations, but now we're doing them with God. And when we can do that, those situations lose a lot of their power to hurt us because we're with God. And that's the most important thing for us. So now we're going to practice this technique together. And just a preamble, Master says to try it on small problems first, okay? Because if we try it on the big problems first, we're likely to become very anxious about whether we get a solution or not, and that defeats the purpose. Try it on something small, that it doesn't matter whether we get an answer or not. Then we can stay calm. And Master said, keep at it until we're absolutely sure of the intuition, as differentiated from feelings that give an illusion of self-sufficiency. And he said, the feeling that makes us enjoy peace immediately after or during deep meditation is called intuition. So here's the technique again. It's very simple, 4 steps. Simple to say. Learn to reason clearly and calmly feel all the time. Practice a meditation technique or an affirmation as we're about to do to access a sense of calmness. Then we concentrate simultaneously at the heart center and the Christ center, the spiritual eye, and then we ask God to direct our intuition so that we may know what we can do about our problems. Now, the affirmation that I'd like us to use is, you all know it, I think. I will reason, I will will, and I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. And I've picked that affirmation because I think it's a perfect embodiment of the principle to balance our own willpower with the intuitive guidance that our willpower often needs to support it. Again, remember the quote from Scientific Healing Affirmations. A balance should be struck between the medieval idea of wholly depending on God and the modern way of sole reliance on the ego. So we're going to do something a little bit different for this affirmation. And this is just something that I think might help us to get into the feeling of keeping the awareness at both centers at the same time. Okay, so we break the affirmation into 2 parts. I will reason, I will will, and I will act. That's clearly willpower, right? So for that part of the affirmation, we can pay attention to the feeling at the Christ center. And then the second part, which is really an act of surrender or devotion. Let's put our awareness at the heart center. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. And then we'll go back and forward between the spiritual eye and the heart center for the first part and the second part of the affirmation. We'll do that for some time. And then we'll do some repetitions where we then become aware, we put our attention at the heart center and the spiritual eye both at the same time. And this is just a way of getting into the habit of, it's hard to put the attention at both places at the same time at the beginning. But if we get a little practice at each center and then we marry them together, let's see if that works for us. And again, in Scientific Healing Affirmations, Master said that will affirmations should be practiced with the attention at the spiritual eye, And devotional affirmations should be practiced with the attention at the heart center. So that's another reason we're doing it in this way. And then when we've accessed a certain degree of calmness, then we can ask God for the solution to the small problem that we're going to be experimenting with. So let's do that. So sitting in the meditation posture, just take a moment to think of some small problem that you'd like to practice this technique on. I'll give you 30 seconds, a minute to think of that. Maybe it's a certain difficulty with a relationship, not a serious one, just something small, something that you'd like to resolve, some small issue at work or with your family. So now we'll start practicing the affirmation. And again, the first part, keeping the attention at the spiritual eye. Second part, keep the attention at the heart. Try to keep the eyes lifted to the spiritual eye at all times, but that can be separate from the attention, but try to keep them lifted at all times. So repeat after me. I will reason. I will will. I will act. Now switch the attention to the heart center. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. Lifting the attention to the Christ center again. I will reason. I will will. I will act. Heart center. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. Spiritual eye. I will reason. I will will. I will act. Heart center. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. Christ center. I will reason. I will will. I will act. Heart center. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. Christ center. I will reason. I will will. I will act. Heart center. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason. I will will. I will act. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason. I will will. I will act. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason. I will will. I will act. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. Now keep the attention at both centers at the same time throughout the affirmation. I will reason, I will will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. I will reason, I will, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing that I should do. Now just be aware of the heart center and the spiritual eye, and allow any intuitive feelings that might arise to come to us. Master doesn't mince words when he encourages us to develop our intuition, to transcend our mortal nature. In the Second Coming of Christ, Discourse 13, he wrote, How long will you remain a rational animal? How long will you fruitlessly try to look into the endless tracts of creation with only your myopic eyes of senses and reason? How long will you remain bound to satisfying the demands of animal man? Shed all constraining fetters. Know yourself as something immortal, having limitless powers and faculties. No more this age-old dream of rational animal. Wake up. You are the intuitional child of immortality. Jai Guru.